Kasey Kahne is interested in returning to NASCAR. Shane Van Gisbergen made his NASCAR Cup Series debut at the Chicago Street Course for Trackhouse, and Chastain says he spoke to Rick Hendrick, GM, and Kyle Larson. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead by starting talking about Chuck E. Cheese, as it was announced on Wednesday morning that Chuck E. Cheese will be partnering up with Hendrick Motorsports. They'll have an exclusive deal. They'll have t-shirts, and they also got a car as well. Really interesting to see Chuck E. Cheese, to be honest. I didn't know if they were still around as a company or not. Interesting to see him in the sport, and glad to see that Chuck E. Cheese has joined the sport. Another kind of a controversial company, but really cool to see Chuck E. Cheese in the sport. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Fast X. As it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday, or Wednesday afternoon, the LA-based NASCAR marketing division got a Daytona shirt in Fast X movie. That Daytona shirt is actually designed by legendary designer Harris Liu, who has done a really good job designing t-shirts and has also got a lot of inspiration from Sam Bass as well. I think this is really awesome to see that we've got in the new Fast X movie that actually is coming out today. I think it's really awesome stuff, and the shirt looks really cool. I'm glad to see that that shirt is going to be in the Fast X movie. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the NASCAR 75 Greatest Ever Countdown show. As it was reported, I believe, by Fox Sports, that got scored 913,000 viewers for the premiere of that. I think they said it was one of the records, one of the most watched premiere events that's been on Fox. It's not a NASCAR event, which honestly, that is really good. To nearly have 1 million people tune into that, as TV, of course, has been on the decline. To nearly have 1 million people tune into an FS1 event that isn't the race itself, I think is really awesome and really awesome to see, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the North Wilkesboro purses for this weekend. As every time we have a NASCAR race weekend, Bob Pockers puts out the purse money for the Cup Series, Xfinity Series, and the Truck Series. And according to Bob Pockers, the All-Star event is worth $3,563,159. For the open race, which of course will be on Sunday as well, it will be $664,660. And then of course for the truck race, which is Saturday tomorrow, is $696,922. That's some decent money in my opinion. I wish the open money was a little bit more, especially since a lot of some of those cars are going to be open cars that can't run the full season. But of course, there's going to be a lot of drivers trying to qualify from the open to try to get into the main event. So that is the purse money for this weekend. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Pit Crew Challenge. There's been a lot of questions in regards to how much money the team that wins the Pit Crew Challenge, which is going to be later today, which is going to be later this evening, as a matter of fact, which will set up the heat races and a starting lineup for that. Well, the winning pit crew, the one that wins the pit crew, is going to receive $100,000. Now, that doesn't mean just for the driver. That's for the whole pit crew to basically split between each other. I think it's really good. That's quite a bit of money for the pit crew, and it's a good thing to see that they're going to be putting a lot of incentive on that pit crew. So I think that's really awesome to see, and glad to see that they're going to win a ton of money. It's really awesome for sure to see, and I love the fact that they're going to be giving incentives, and people will be able to earn some money. Really exciting stuff. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Midnight. Now, Midnight, of course, is a legendary car that Rusty Wallace ran when he dominated the NASCAR Cup Series in the 1990s. And it was officially announced last night that Rusty Wallace will pace Midnight car at Worldwide Technology Raceway on June 4th, which is about 3 weeks from this weekend. He'll be pacing that car at Worldwide Technology Raceway, which of course is Rusty Wallace's hometown track. This is really amazing to see. I love that we've had a lot of really cool historic moments happening in the sport. I think it's phenomenal that he is going to do that, and I'm looking forward to see that. Unfortunately, I will not be a Gateway this year to see that live, but I really am happy to see that that Midnight car is going to get an opportunity to be shown by the masses at that racetrack. I think it's really awesome and looks amazing, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. Now, Denny Hamlin, of course, does his podcast Action Detrimental, and a lot of people have asked, does Carl Edwards have Twitter? There was a fake Carl Edwards Twitter account that Randy Fuller confirmed that was not Carl Edwards' actual Twitter account, because Carl apparently doesn't have Twitter. Well, Denny Hamlin says that Carl Edwards actually does have Twitter. According to Denny Hamlin, Carl Edwards has a burner account, and Carl Edwards exactly knows what is going on. That is very interesting because a lot of people have said publicly, and some people have said the car owners may have a burner account that we don't even know what his account is. Well, Denny Hamlin, who of course was a teammate for Carl Edwards back in the day, it's interesting to hear that Denny Hamlin says that Carl Edwards actually does have a burner account. It's crazy to see, and really, I hope we can one day find out what that burner account is. If we never find out, it is what it is. But nonetheless, it's interesting to see that Carl Edwards actually does have a burner Twitter account. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the President's Paddock Club. Now, the President's Paddock Club is going to be at the Chicago Street Course event. And according to a report that came out by Front Office Sports, he did say that the cost of the suites of the Chicago Street Course will be $3,015 per person. Now, this sounds like Formula One money. Obviously, with it being a street course event and racing in the streets, it makes a little bit of sense, but that still is a lot of money for a suite for the race. And obviously, it kind of shows that NASCAR is trying to be like Formula One just a little bit. But to be fair, suites do cost quite a bit in events in NASCAR, though I will say compared to F1, they're definitely a lot cheaper. I think suites in the Cup Series are like $600, $650 or something like that. So this is a lot of money. But again, it is a street course event, so it's not surprising that it's costing a lot of money. It's disappointing to see that they're trying to basically spend a lot of money on this event. Nonetheless, so it's interesting to see quite a bit of money for this event, but that is how much it costs per person to go to the Chicago Street Course event. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Young's Motorsports and G2G Racing. As it was announced yesterday that Young's Motorsports and G2G Racing have been handed 25-point and owner's point penalties for window nets that violated the rules. Apparently, you have to have window nets that basically are within the last 2 years. They have window nets that are too old, unfortunately. So they basically were penalized $25,000 and also 25 owner points and driver's points. Now, G2G Racing is going to appeal the penalties, which is really interesting that they're going to be appealing these penalties. Young's Motorsports and Tyler Young has said that they're going to wait till after North Wilkes to make a decision if they're going to appeal or not. It's in the NASCAR rulebook that you have to run a window net that's within the spec within the last couple of years. If your window net is too old, you basically are going to get a penalty. So even though G2G Racing, Glory to God Racing, is going to appeal, I'm not expecting that they're going to win that appeal, unfortunately, simply because of the fact that basically we have to have a window net that's basically up to spec, and if it's not up to spec, you're going to get a penalty, unfortunately. So it's disappointing to hear, especially since the fact that that team doesn't really have a lot of owners' points to begin with. Both teams really don't. Of course, Kane Honeycutt did have a strong run with that team last weekend in the 20 truck, but still, it is disappointing that they're getting penalties, but it is in the rules, and you can't basically violate those rules and guidelines, and you got to follow those rules. So I'm not expecting they're going to win the appeals. If both end up appealing, they're probably going to end up losing the appeal, unfortunately. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the Winter World 125. So on Wednesday or Tuesday, we had a lot of racing and some Cars Late Model Tour racing. And of course, we have a couple races discussed. The first one is the Winter World 125. So Brendan Queen went on to go ahead and win the event. A bunch of notable NASCAR drivers were in that event. Kane Honeycutt ended up finishing in 5th. Lane Riggs finished in 6th. Chase Briscoe did pretty good apparently in the race. He ended up finishing in 10th. Kevin Harvick finished 11th. Brad Keselowski finished in 12th. Dale Suarez finished in 15th. Dale Jr. finished 16th. Dale Jr. actually got involved in an accident in a crash and got a T-bone, I think, by William Sawalage. We'll talk about William in a second. Ross Chastain finished in 19th, and Ross Chastain apparently got in Dale Jr. Tyler Ankrum finished 24th, and William Sawalage, after DNFing and crashing out, finished in 31st. A lot of these now drivers, of course, are going to be competing in the Truck Series and the Cup Series events coming up here over the next few days, and it's really, really cool to see that Brendan Queen went on to win. Brendan Queen is a really good late model racer, so congratulations to Butterbean on getting the victory. It's just really exciting to see, and I'm looking forward to some of the racing coming up this weekend. But nonetheless, congratulations to Brendan Queen on picking up the victory. Really excited for him and glad to see he won the event. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the ASA race. Now, we had the ASA AllStars race, which is an invitational event, and there were a lot of drivers that were in that ASA race. Well, Bubba Paul, who in my opinion is probably one of the best late model racers ever, one of the best drivers across the country, he went on to beat a bunch of NASCAR drivers and won the ASA National Tour event. William Byron, of course, was really, really fast in the practice session, ended up finishing in second. Chase Elliott finished in third. Great finish for Chase, so he scores a top 3. Sammy Smith ends up finishing in fourth, and Daniel Suarez ends up finishing in fifth. Suarez actually been up front competing for the win early in the race, but ended up falling back. For Bubba Pollard to beat all these NASCAR Cup Series and drivers in the Truck Series as well, who are higher up in the series, shows how much talent Bubba Pollard truly does have and how good of a driver he truly is. So congratulations to Bubba Pollard on winning the ASA race. For what I heard, the race is really, really good, and nonetheless, huge congratulations to Bubba Pollard on picking up the victory. It's a huge win for those guys. It's really exciting, and congratulations to him on picking up the victory. He definitely deserved that win, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kyle Busch. Now, we got a couple Kyle Busch stories we're going to talk about in today's episode. The first one we're going to talk about is what Kyle Busch says. That he says we should bring the AllStar race to other short tracks. So, obviously, NASCAR is returning to North Wilkesboro for the first time for the AllStar event. Now, there's other rumors and rumors going around, and it's expected that the AllStar race is going to return to North Wilkesboro in 2024. So we're not going to see changes in the All-Star race likely in 2024, unless, of course, North Wilkesboro does turn into a points-paying event. If the All-Star race does not return to North Wilkesboro, because they do turn North Wilkesboro into a points-paying event, where could we see the All-Star race go? Well, there are a couple of potential options that they go with. What about Rockingham Speedway? And we're going to get into Rockingham in just a little bit with Kyle Busch again. But Rockingham Speedway, of course, there are the rumors and rumors that they could make a return to NASCAR in the foreseeable future. And Rockingham, unlike North Wilkesboro, they actually have been race ready, and they've actually been racing, I believe, some late model races at that racetrack as well. They've had some issues kind of getting because of tire shortages and stuff, but that is the track that they could go to. What about some other tracks? What about Hickory? That would be really cool to see Hickory maybe get the All-Star race. But I think if we're going to be doing basically the All-Star race, I would love to see a rotation going forward. I think that'd be really, really fun. And NASCAR was like, you know what? We're going to rotate the All-Star race and move the All-Star race around to different areas of the country. Maybe go out to the West Coast. Maybe do some other tracks. I don't know at this point, but it would nonetheless be really, really cool to see if we could see the All-Star race run at different racetracks. It looks like there's a chance it will be back in North Wilkesboro next year. But nonetheless, I do agree with Kyle Busch. I would love to see the All-Star race at a different type of racetrack. I think that'd be really, really fun and would be really, really exciting overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Kyle Busch once again. Now, Kyle Busch was being asked questions about what tracks could potentially be viable options to make a return. Now, Kyle Busch obviously mentioned a couple of racetracks like Ontario Speedway, Texas World, and obviously he did mention Riverside, but those tracks are unlikely to come back. But one viable option Kyle Busch does mention is Rockingham Speedway, and he said that it could be a viable option for a return. Now, we've heard over the last couple months that Rockingham Speedway has been in the rumors that it potentially could return to the NASCAR schedule as early as 2024, as the president of that racetrack is really vying for a cup date in the foreseeable future. Now, the NASCAR Cup Series has not raced at North Wilkesboro since 2004. The last time they raced there, we had that fantastic finish between rookie Kasey Kahne, who we'll be getting to later in this episode, and Matt Kenseth, and Jamie McMurray was really close right behind. Now, NASCAR has raced in North Wilkesboro since then for the Truck Series in 2012 and 2013. In 2012, I can't remember who won that race, but in 2013, we saw Kyle Larson pick up the victory there. It would definitely nonetheless be really, really awesome and really cool to see Rockingham come back. And that's a track, in my opinion, that I think has a really good shot to return. And obviously, that's not the only track that's in the talks of coming back. You've got National Fairgrounds that has a huge possibility and a shot, in my opinion, of returning as well. They're getting much, much closer to returning there. Though I will say it's probably going to be a few years before that track is going to come back because they got to do a lot of updates to that racetrack. But I think the chances of going back to Rockingham, though, going back to that track, I think the chances are a lot higher, and it would not surprise or shock me if we do go back there as early as 2024. I think the chances are really, really high, and I think it'd be really cool. But I do agree with Kyle Busch that there should definitely be a really big possibility of it coming back. I really do want to see Rockingham come back to the schedule. I miss seeing that track. It's been a long time. I did get to see some truck races there, but I would love to see the Cup Series back there. It's been way too long. They need to go back there, and I really hope and pray they do decide to go back there in the foreseeable future, because I think it'd be really good for the sport, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Tony Stewart. Now, Tony Stewart spoke to Michael Carey, who runs the SRX account on Twitter. And Tony Stewart basically spoke on the growth of the SRX, how, of course, it's going to be on ESPN on Thursday nights, and spoke how the series has grown and developed. This is obviously going to be the third season of the SRX, and it's expected to be the biggest season of the SRX up to this point. You've got a lot of really awesome drivers, of course, will be competing in the SRX this season. There's a lot of drivers running full-time. You've got Haley Deegan, who will be competing for a full championship this year. I think she's going to be a contender. You got Brad Keselowski running the full season this year. You've got, I believe, Ryan Newman running the full season in 2023. Bobby Labonte's back this year. Of course, Tony Stewart's back this season. You've got other drivers like Joseph Newgarden running select races. I think Ryan Hunter-Reay's back this year. Paul Tracy's back this season. You've got other drivers running select races. You've got Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick. You're going to have others like Denny Hamlin coming in. Daniel Suarez is going to be part of the series this season. There's a lot of really awesome drivers part of the SRX, and a lot of it is due to the fact that it's going to be on Thursday nights. And what's interesting is a lot of these SRX races are, of course, lining up with the NASCAR weekend. And my hope is we get a few more different drivers coming to run the SRX. Maybe someone like a Bubba Wallace comes in for a race. Kyle Larson would definitely be a really viable option to bring in. And then obviously, of course, you have other drivers. I like to see Kyle Larson come in. Kyle Larson would be really, really fun to have in the series. Maybe even somehow they get convinced Carl Edwards come back in racing the SRX, or Braindale Jr. or Jimmy Johnson in as well. Nonetheless, so I think this is going to be a really awesome SRX season. We're literally about 2 months away from that. The lineups are almost completely finalized at this point, but it's really exciting to see the SRX is making such huge strides, such huge growths. I'm excited for the season. It's going to be on ESPN this year, and I cannot wait for this season. It's going to be really fun, and I think we're going to have a fun championship this year in 2023. So I'm excited for it, and I'm looking forward to the SRX season, because I think it's going to be a really strong and good season, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Kyle Larson was in the Indianapolis area yesterday, and he had a press conference with the media, kind of speaking on running the 2024 Indianapolis 500. So as I just said a second ago, Kyle Larson is going to be running the 2024 and 2025 Indianapolis 500s for Arrow McLaren, I believe driving the number 5 or the number 6 car. He obviously says, in speaking to the NBC, that his goal is that he wants to win the 2024 or 2025 Indianapolis 500, and of course he's going to have Hendrick backing as well. Kyle Larson, if anybody in this field, I think he has potentially the best shot and opportunity we've seen a NASCAR driver really have since probably Tony Stewart back in 2001. Arrow McLaren, while they've been a little bit struggling, a little bit off the pace of time this year in the practice sessions, they're a team last year that was really strong and confident. And if Kurt Busch can come in here and run really, really good and finish 6th in his debut when he didn't have a lot of open wheel experience, I think Kyle Larson's chances of winning the Indy 500 are really, really high. He's going to be in a really competitive car. He obviously said if he was going to run the Indy 500, he wanted to be in a competitive car. This is a very, very competitive and a very, very fast car, and I think his chances are definitely really, really high to win the Indy 500 in the 2024 season. Now, do I think he's going to win? I think it's certainly possible. Now, there's going to be a lot of competition. There's going to be a lot of great drivers running in this, and I think his chances do go high. But I think a lot of fans are going to ask why him and why not Kyle Busch, because Kyle Busch was actually a driver supposed to go in this car in 2022. Obviously, found out that Tony Kanai kind of took that ride because they took a driver that had experience over a driver like Kyle Busch. But I think it would have been, hopefully, well, maybe somehow Arrow McLaren could get another car somehow and bring Kyle Busch in. That'd be really fun to bring Kyle Busch in. So we could have Kyle Larson and Kyle Busch against each other in the Indy 500. But I think Kyle Larson's opportunity to win the Indy 500, I think he's going to have a really good shot. He's going to be in a competitive car. He's going to be really, really fast. And I think he's going to have a good shot of winning. I think he's going to be doing some testing. I think he's going to be doing some practice sessions, maybe today. We're not entirely sure. But he's supposed to do a test session in Indianapolis in the future and get some more experience. He's already gotten his seat fitted. He had that watermelon in the background in that video. But I think Kyle Larson's chances for sure to win the Indianapolis 500 are definitely much higher than ever. And I think he's got a really good opportunity and a shot to win the Indianapolis 500 in the 2024 season. And if he doesn't win in 2024, he's going to have another opportunity in 2025. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jordan Taylor. As it was announced on Wednesday afternoon that Jordan Taylor is going to drive the 10 car for Kaulig Racing at Portland Raceway, making his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut at Portland Raceway. Jordan Taylor's already made his NASCAR Cup Series debut, driving the number 9 car for Chase Elliott in substitution for him. He ended up finishing, I think, in the mid-20s, was fast in practice, but struggled a little bit in the race, and got raced really, really hard when usually he races squeaky clean. But this is going to be a fantastic opportunity for Jordan Taylor driving the number 10 car. Obviously, his 10 car has already scored 2 victories this season. We saw AJ Allmendinger win at Circuit of the Americas, which I think that is going to be, which he had to come back, kind of got in a little bit of controversy, I think, with Sheldon Creed, who had the lead at the time and kind of dumped him. And then Kyle Larson ended up winning in Darlington in a fantastic finish with John Hunter Nemechek. Jordan Taylor is going to be really competitive in my opinion. That is a pretty solid car, though not always the fastest car on the racetrack. Jordan Taylor does have a lot of that experience from racing sports cars and a lot of that road course experience, which I think is really going to help him out have a shot at going and getting into victory. I think that is a very competitive car, and I think his chances to win are high. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of really strong competition. You've got a lot of really good Xfinity Series drivers running that event, but I think Jordan Taylor is up for the challenge, and I think he'll be very competitive. Plus, this basically almost a defending team of that one event, because remember last year, AJ Allmendinger won the event last year, so they're going for back-to-back victories at Portland, and I think especially if the rain comes into play, I think it's going to be overall a really, really fun event. But nonetheless, so I'm so excited to see this. I'm looking forward to it. I'm very happy to see that you're going to see Jordan Taylor have a shot. I think he does have a really good opportunity and a shot to win the event. I think he'll be very, very competitive, and I think there's a good chance he could potentially win the 2023 race at Portland. Now we're going to jump on to the first of 3 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Ross Chastain once again. Now, Ross Chastain, it seems like it's a week-by-week basis that he's in controversy. And once again, this past weekend at Darlington, he was in a little bit of controversy when he sent it way too far into the corner, ended up wrecking himself and Kyle Larson out of contention. Now, Ross Chastain has been asked a lot of questions in regards if he has spoken to all the people. And he actually says and spoke to the media, and basically their spokesperson says he spoke to Rick Hendrick, GM, and Kyle Larson. He says he just needs to stop running into things, and he says he has a lot of things he needs to clean up. Now, this is very interesting here that he actually is speaking to Rick Hendrick, Kyle Larson, and GM, probably apologizing to them for the mistakes that he made out on the racetrack, but he also admits that he has a lot of things he needs to clean up. And I do agree with Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain has made a lot of mistakes out on the racetrack. You go through the last few years, especially over the last 3 or 4 weeks, where he's definitely made a lot of mistakes on the racetrack. And there are things that he definitely needs to clean up. And this is, I believe, the first time he's really cost himself a shot at victory by making a mistake out on the racetrack at Darlington. The one thing about Ross Chastain is I don't want to see Ross Chastain completely get rid of that aggression. When he makes sometimes some really aggressive moves that are on the racetrack, sometimes those moves can be really, really impressive. Unfortunately, some of the moves that Ross Chastain has made have been way over aggressive and has been way in over his head. Now, granted, he is the points leader currently at the moment right now, so that definitely helps. But he does have to clean up some of the aggressive mistakes he's making on the racetrack. There's a time where you can be aggressive, especially when you're making it 3 wide at Dover. That's extremely impressive, and that move was really, really great to see. But you can't affect other competitors on the racetrack by some of the moves you made. And he's gotten into a lot of beef, and a lot of drivers have been frustrated with him. Even if he starts changing some of the way he races on the racetrack and some of the aggressive moves, you calm down just a little bit, he's still probably likely not going to win the championship because of that. Now, a lot of people have compared him over the last week, including Dale Jr., have compared him to Dale Sr. I would go as far to say that I would compare Ross Chastain to like a young Ernie Irvan. Ernie Irvan is very similar to Ross Chastain. Took a long time to get really good equipment. And when he got a good equipment, he made a lot of mistakes on the racetrack. But I think one thing about Ross Chastain is even though yes, he's a points leader, so I think he's going to be able to eventually clean up those mistakes on the racetrack and will become a much more better driver. All we ask from Ross, as a lot of us fans, is while we do want you to keep that aggression, tone it back just a slight bit. Don't completely get rid of it. Don't get yourself out of your head. And I don't want you basically losing yourself and try to be aggressive, but also don't be over aggressive. Because while we do love the fact that we talk about it and get a lot of great storylines, we also don't want to see drivers completely affected and you destroying race cars on the racetrack because of your aggressive mistakes. You've gotten into fights this year. You've had drivers unhappy with you. You had multiple drivers that are unhappy, not just Kyle Larson, but Kyle Busch was also unhappy for Ross Chastain in the race as well, which seemed like it's been a week-by-week thing where Kyle Busch and Ross Chastain are seemingly in the beef nowadays. But Ross Chastain just has to clean up some of those things on the racetrack, and I think he'll become a driver that will be much, much better. It's good to see that he spoke to ball 3. He just has to clean things up, stop running into things, and he's absolutely right. If you clean up some of those mistakes, he's going to become a really good driver in this sport. There's a reason why he's in the Cup Series. It's because the guy can drive a race car. He's an incredible race car driver. He's talented, and he's one of the best drivers in the Cup Series field when he's not making mistakes. When he's making mistakes and over his head, he costs himself wins, and I think he's got to clean up some of those things on the racetrack. If he does that, I think he's going to be in a really good position as a race car driver, and I think he's going to be an absolute beast and a contender on the racetrack. You just got to clean some of those mistakes up and some of that up, and I think he'll be in a very good position as a race car driver. I think he'll be in a pretty good position, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we are talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. Now, there's been a lot of rumors, and initially got reported in late April that Shane Van Gisbergen was going to be driving the Project 91 car, as there's been rumors he was going to drive the Project 91 car. Well, it was officially confirmed last night that Shane Van Gisbergen is going to drive the number 91 for Trackhouse Racing and will become the second driver in 2023 or all-time to drive the Project 91 entry at Chicago Street Course with Embrace Health sponsoring him. Shane Van Gisbergen, for those of you who do not know, is a 3-time Repco Supercars champion and one of the greatest drivers in supercar history. And a lot of people are going to ask, how will he perform? Well, the Repco Supercars are kind of a little bit of inspiration NASCAR took. They kind of took some inspiration from supercars. And with how much experience that Shane Van Gisbergen does have at street course racing, especially racing in V8 supercars, I think Shane Van Gisbergen does have a very good opportunity and a shot to win. I think he's going to be very, very competitive. It's going to be one of the drivers, I think, to be, because there's a lot of unknowns going into the event. I think, especially if you've never seen V8 supercar racing, if you've never seen this guy race, you're going to be in for a treat. This guy has a lot of experience. He can be aggressive, especially since the Cup Series has been aggressive as it's been over the last few years. I think Shane Van Gisbergen ultimately has a really strong shot and a really strong possibility of being contending. I think he's going to be very, very quick, very, very fast, and I think he's going to have ultimately a strong shot at getting the victory. I expect him to be absolutely a contender for the win, and I think that 91 team is going to be fast. Kimi Räikkönen did decent in the Project 91 car, but I think Shane Van Gisbergen is going to get in that car and be absolutely beast and absolutely a contender for the event. So now we get into other questions in regard to this on what other drivers could we see in the Project 91 car in 2023. There's a lot of drivers who we could see. What about Daniel Ricciardo? Daniel Ricciardo has shown interest in winning the race in NASCAR. Obviously, he's part of the Red Bull Academy right now. Basically, so far, that team is the 3rd driver at Red Bull in Formula 1. Daniel Ricciardo in the past has shown interest in NASCAR. I would not be surprised if he gets into the 91 car in the future. What about Carl Edwards? I know that car is basically usually reserved for drivers who are international, but Carl Edwards, of course, is showing interest, maybe 1.1 to come back to NASCAR. I definitely would love to see him come back and run a race or just a one-off race, because we all miss you, Carl. It'd be really fun to have you. What about Kurt Busch? Maybe, obviously, Kurt Busch does drive for 2311 race. If he likely returns, maybe he returns there. But what if they decide to get Kurt Busch for one race? I think that'd be really, really fun and awesome. What about other drivers like a Juan Montoya? Juan Montoya is not racing NASCAR since 2014, but I think it'd be really fun to have a driver like Juan Montoya come back to NASCAR and be competitive there. What about Kasey Kahne? We're going to talk about Kasey Kahne here in just a little bit, but Kasey Kahne has obviously indicated he might want to come back to NASCAR in the foreseeable future. I think bringing Kasey Kahne back in the Project 91 would be really awesome and really, really cool. But going back and talk about the Project 91 team, there's just so many potential possibilities of drivers that they could get. And I think a lot of fans are really looking forward to see this car. Going, like I said, back talking about Shane Van Gisbergen, this is a huge opportunity for this team. And I think this is going to be the best chance for this team to win at the street course. And again, I think of how many unknowns are going to a street course event. If you got street course racing experience, and not a lot of drivers do, I think AJ Allmendinger has a little bit of street course racing experience from his Champ Car days. Austin might have some experience, and I think maybe Michael McDowell has experience. But there's not a lot of drivers that have that street course racing experience, and I think having that experience that Shane Van Gisbergen has, he may be the favorite going into the event, and I would not be surprised if he ends up winning the event overall. But it's really exciting to see nonetheless. They're going to have Shane Van Gisbergen coming in and racing Repco Super, basically racing in the next-gen era. And you love the fact you've seen so many drivers come back to racing, and a lot of drivers showing interest in racing the next-gen car. And Shane Van Gisbergen is the next driver to get the opportunity and a shot. I'm excited for him. I'm pumped. And I'm looking forward to see Shane Van Gisbergen and running the event. It's really exciting stuff, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story in today's episode as we are talking about Kasey Kahne. Now, obviously, we've had a couple drivers talk about the fact that they're interested in making a return to NASCAR. Obviously, Kurt Busch has said he's getting closer and closer to making a return to NASCAR, and he's working on a day-by-day basis to get back to the sport. And Carl Edwards multiple times has indicated that he's interested in wanting to make a return to NASCAR. Well, there's another driver that has shown interest in maybe wanting to return to NASCAR, and that is Kasey Kahne. Kasey Kahne has said that he has considered a return to NASCAR. He says, I think it would be great to run a stock car once again. And he says he's feeling much better compared to when he was in 2018. The reason Kasey Kahne left the sport back in 2018 is because of the fact that he basically had a lot of dehydration issues and had some health problems. He couldn't run long races, so that's why he went over to the World of Outlaws. But he says, compared to a few years ago, he is feeling much better. Kasey Kahne, I would love for him to come back to the NASCAR Cup Series. It has been way too long since he's been in NASCAR. I know the last few years of his Cup Series career did not go very well, especially when he drove for Levi Family Racing in that final season in 2018. It did not go very well for him. He struggled and left early in that year after, I think, the Southern 500 because of his health issues that he had late in that season. He's supposed to complete the full 2018 season, and then he left the sport. Kasey Kahne coming back would be absolutely incredible. And a guy had a pretty solid NASCAR Cup Series career. He won like 17 or 18 Cup Series races. He won 3 Coca-Cola 600s and also won the Brickyard 400 in 2017. Now, the question would be, what teams could Kasey Kahne end up driving for in NASCAR? What about 2311 Racing? We know that there's that third 2311 racing car that could be available. Of course, we obviously know that that's likely reserved for Kurt Busch when he does make a return. But what if he goes to that car? That'd be really fun to see. What about the Project 91 car? Like I just mentioned a few minutes ago, talk about the Shane Van Gisbergen story. Kasey Kahne driving that car, I think he'd be very, very competitive and pretty fast in that car. Yes, it's been about 5 or 6 years, so maybe not the most competitive, but I think Kasey Kahne would probably do a really good job. What about Junior Motorsports? We obviously know that Junior Motorsports has been rumored in the cards that they could eventually return to the NASCAR Cup Series in the future, actually go to the Cup Series or trying to get to the Cup Series. They've had a hard time getting up there, but that could be a potential team that they go to because plus he's driven for Junior Motorsports in the past in the Cup Series, and maybe he runs for them in the Xfinity Series. Obviously, the Xfinity Series is a potential possibility. And what about Kyle Busch Motorsports in the Truck Series? Kyle Busch, I believe, is not Kyle Busch. Kasey Kahne, I think, has driven for KBM in the past. That'd be a good team to go to. They're a Chevy organization now. Maybe he goes full-time to KBM in the future. I may be exaggerating there, but maybe he goes there. Nonetheless, so I think it would be definitely really, really fun to see Kasey Kahne come back to the sport, and I think it'd be really cool to have him back. Now, do I think he's going to come back to NASCAR? I think, unlike maybe Carl Edwards, I think he's more likely. Kasey Kahne has been racing. I think he's getting that itch to come back, and I think the fact he showed up to the racetrack and got recognized the way he did, and he still looks pretty good in my opinion, too. It's not like he's aged at all. So I think he would be pretty competitive, and having him back in the sport would be phenomenal, incredible. And I think a lot of it is showing the interest of the next-gen car. There's so many drivers we've seen come into the sport we never thought would come in. You've had guys like Travis trying to run a next-gen car. You've had drivers like, of course, Shane Van Gisbergen come into play. You've also had drivers like Jonathan Davenport come to race, and Kimi Räikkönen, and Jenson Button. And then you've had legendary NASCAR drivers come back. You've had basically Ryan Newman come back and run a select few races. He's going to run in North Wilkesboro this weekend for the AllStar race. And you also got Jimmy Johnson that's come back. And now you have potential possibility of other drivers, maybe in the future, like a Tony Stewart or maybe even a Kasey Kahne coming back. I think it is overall really exciting to see that Kasey Kahne is interested again. I really want to see Kasey Kahne come back. It'd be really, really fun to have a legendary. Oh, I forgot to mention Gray Biffle. Gray Biffle also came back and ran some next-gen races, of course, for NY Racing. Not a fast team, but he came back as well. But I think it'd be really phenomenal to see Kasey Kahne come back and run some races. I think the chances of him coming back are definitely a little higher than maybe Carl Edwards, but I think he definitely has a shot of making a return, and I really would love to see Kasey Kahne make a official return to NASCAR. I really hope it ends up happening. It would be really, really good and really fun for the sport. I don't know how competitive he'd be. Maybe he would be competitive, who knows? But I really hope that Kasey Kahne says, you know what? I want to come back and race in the sport, and I really hope he does make an official return. So I hope it ends up happening. I miss seeing Kasey Kahne. I miss all these legendary drivers because Kasey Kahne kind of was a driver who was pretty good when I became a fan, though he kind of struggled in 2007 when I got into the sport when he drove for Everham. He did have quite a bit of success in the sport, and I really do hope that we can see Kasey Kahne make a return because we miss seeing Kasey Kahne. Hopefully, he comes back to NASCAR in the foreseeable future. So, that is good for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel, notifications on so you know if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links go below over that, and comment below your thoughts below on today's video. Well, do you think Kasey Kahne will return to NASCAR? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the other stories we discussed today on the channel, including Shane Van Gisbergen and Ross Chastain? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later, I might not have another video on the channel. I'm not entirely sure. I will have to wait and see if I have another video today. It will probably be a preview video. Then on Saturday, we're going to have only potentially one video on the channel or two videos. We're going to have the Truck Series race review and maybe some certain driver wins the pole for the truck race. We might do a video on that. Then on Sunday, we're going to have maybe two videos on the channel, a special video, and then obviously, of course, we're going to have the All-Star race review on the channel. We got a lot of content coming out over the next few weeks. Should be really fun. Next week, there's going to be like 15 or 20 videos on the channel, and we're also potentially going to have that big Josh Berry announcement coming as well. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.